Okay, well, now I'll tell the story. Unfortunately, I run out of room on the phone. I had to delete a bunch of stuff. So I'll tell the story now about my tricycle and what happened to it in 1971 at Charlie Anderson's Trailer Park, which is where we lived. It's no longer called Charlie Anderson's Trailer Park, but there is still a trailer park there. It just goes under a different name now. And we left Charlie Anderson's Trailer Park in 1972. I was 4 years old when we left Charlie Anderson's Trailer Park, but I remember it quite well anyway. Um, so here we go. When I was 3 years old, I had a tricycle. Loved my tricycle. I always loved my wheels, Always had a thing about cars and different things too. In fact, when I was when I was a kid, even at that age, I knew the different cars that were on the road. Anyway, but I'll show you a picture here. This is a picture of me on my tricycle in our driveway. You can see all the oil on the driveway too. That was from my dad's 1962 Pontiac Parisienne. In those days, all cars leaked oil, so this was just common for any of you young folk who don't remember. Anywhere cars were parked, there'd be a lot of oil on the ground because they all leaked oil. Anyway, here we go. Let me show you. There it is. Okay, there I am on my tricycle. And you can see all the oil on the driveway there. That was from my dad's car. There we go. That's me on my tricycle at 3 years old. And when I tell this story, you'll be quite surprised anyway about what happened. But there it is. There's my tricycle. That's me on it at 3 years old in 1971. This would have been just before the accident happened that destroyed my tricycle. But anyway, we'll take that away now. I'll turn this other phone off because I'm trying to recharge it now. It was almost dead. And I use it for internet. It no longer works as a phone, but I still can use it for internet sometimes. And you can see the busted tooth and stuff there. I'm quite a snaggly tooth looking outfit. Anyway, the story is this. We had this neighbor. Well, they were a neighbor couple, man and a woman, and they had kids. They had 2 kids. I was friends with the daughter and used to play with her quite often. And she was a little bit younger than me, but not by much. Like I say, I was only 3 years old. Had my tricycle, like I just showed you. And they were one of the few families around that had 2 cars at that time. You didn't really see families that had 2 cars. Like in our case, my mom didn't drive. My dad had a car. My dad had the 1962 Pontiac Parisienne, a 4-door, big aquamarine colored 4-door sedan. That was his car. The old couple that lived next door to us had a 1952 Plymouth Cranbrook. And it was a sedan too, a 4-door sedan. There was a guy who lived in a cottage on the trailer park property, and he actually lived directly in front of us. When we'd look out the front window of our trailer was actually my bedroom, and when you looked out there, you could see his cottage, and he had a 1947 Hudson Commodore 8. Great big inline 8 engine in it, long hood on that car. It was an old 1940s car. I think that was, well, it wasn't the oldest vehicle now that I think about it, because that's going to factor into the story. But every morning I'd wake up with him starting that car. It was a funny thing. You'd hear it out there. Oh, oh, oh. That's how it sounded. Oh, 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 when he'd be trying to start it. And then it would start. It always started. But you'd hear that noise and look out, and he'd be out there starting the thing. And then once it started, of course, it would run kind of rough for a while and backfire and all that. And then gradually it would even out. And we'd drive that to work, I drove that every day. And that was a 1971, 1947 car. And that wasn't altogether unusual. The newest car in the neighborhood at that time belonged to a fellow by the name of Harry Matheson. And Harry Matheson owned a 1969 Dodge Polara. A big black four-door car, and that was his car, and that was the newest car around there, and that was quite a new car. I remember that. It really stood out amongst the others. The second newest car was owned by a family there too, and it was a 1967 Chev Impala. It was a four-door sedan as well. You didn't see a lot of two-door cars back then, really, because they just weren't practical. These were all families, so they needed their four doors. So most of the cars you'd see back then were four-door sedans, really. But that 67 Chevy, I remember one time they had kids, and I used to play with their kids. And one time they had all the cousins over and stuff, and there wasn't enough room inside the car for everybody. They had the car packed full of people. And then they had the trunk lid open, and the kids were all riding in the trunk. They had the trunk lid was propped up with something there, kind of tied up or propped up or whatever, and all the kids were in the trunk. And I remember them leaving one time like that, with all the children in the trunk of the car. And the car just loaded with people, too. You couldn't get anybody else into that car. And you'd never see anything like that these days, but back then stuff like that was quite common. Anyway, the story I'm going to tell is about one of the few ladies around there that drove. And they had two vehicles. Her husband had a 1939 Chev half-ton pickup truck, which he drove to work every day at the RCA record plant, which was in town. That's the plant where they actually pressed records that you'd play on a turntable, music records. And this lady, her first name was Geraldine. I'm not going to say her last name. She's passed away now, but I'm still not going to say her last name. Geraldine, she had a 1958 Buick Roadmaster sedan, a great big black four-door sedan. That was her car. And it had an automatic transmission, which you didn't see very much back then. Most of the cars back then were what was called a free in the tree, which was a free-speed standard shift, and the gear shift was up on the steering column. But you shifted through the gears manually. You had a clutch pedal and all that, just like any standard, and you shifted the gears manually. It was like an H pattern, shifting pattern, and it was up on the steering column as opposed to coming up out of the floor like you usually see now with a standard. Anyway, that's what most of the vehicles I remember back then were. But this particular car, this 58 Buick, it had a Buick Roadmaster. It had a automatic transmission. Anyway, the roads around there were all gravel. All the roads for the trailer park were gravel, and it was tough going when you were riding a tricycle. And I remember I had a hard time making any headway on a tricycle. I could actually walk or run faster than I could go on my tricycle, but still I love my tricycle, so I was going to ride it as much as I could, even if it wasn't easy. And Geraldine, she had an obsession, and I don't know where it came from. I don't know if it was justified or not, but she had a belief and an obsession that her husband was cheating on her. And so several times a day, she'd go into town and she'd go for the parking lot at the RCA record plant and make sure her husband's truck was there where it was supposed to be. And then she'd be reassured that he was at work and there was nothing going on, and then she could go home. But then gradually, I guess it would build up in her mind, she'd get the idea that something was going on. So she'd have to go back into town and check it out again and go for the parking lot again. She'd do this several times a day. And she was just kind of single-minded about it, She really did believe he was cheating on her. And Like I say, I don't know if he ever gave her a reason to feel that way or if it was just something from within her, but it was there, and to her it was a real thing, whether it was or not, you know. And it must have been an awful tormenting thing to have to live that way, really, you know, regardless of what was causing it. But one day I'm riding my tricycle, and of course I'm going down the little gravel road there in front of all the trailers. And of course I have to cross everybody's driveway to do this. I'm going through the back, crossing her driveway, you know. And of course her car is to my right. The back end of her car I can see towering over my head, because the cars were big back then and I was little. And I was sitting down on a tricycle. So, you know, the trunk lid of her car and the tail fins and everything actually came up over my head, because this car had tail fins. It was a 1958 Buick Roadmaster. And anyway, she had gotten into her car. I'm pedaling along. I'm about halfway along there past her car. I'm right about in the middle of the back of her car at that point. And she starts the car up. And then I heard this loud metallic clank. And I knew what that meant. With that car, when you heard that clank, it meant she was putting it into gear. She was going to back it up. And here I was right there, and I knew I couldn't move very fast with the tricycle, on the gravel. So what I did is I abandoned the tricycle. I jumped off it, and I ran. And I went onto the lawn beside the back end of her car. And she didn't see me anyway. She just came straight back, and then there was a crunch, and the back end of her car actually came up off the ground. Well, the back end of her car came up off the ground, and then I heard the crunch as the car came down. Of course, she flattened my tricycle. And, of course, she gets out of the car because she wants to see what she's hit. She knows she's hit something. So she gets out, she takes the car out of gear, she gets out of the car. She goes around to the back of the car. Now, I'm standing there watching her, and I'm thinking, like, you just wrecked my tricycle. Like, you flattened my wheels, you know. Wasn't too happy. I wasn't too impressed with her at that moment in time, I'll tell you. But she looked underneath the car. She saw the flattened tricycle, and she went completely insane. Like, she really went wild. You know, she thought she'd killed me. She figured that I was all caught up under there too. So she now thought that she had taken my life. Of course, I'm standing there. She still hasn't seen me. I'm standing there very quiet, watching her, and not understanding why she's freaking out. You know, at that time, I didn't understand. All I knew is she had wrecked my tricycle. That's all I was concerned about. And anyway, she starts screaming, no, no, no. Oh, God, no, and crying and everything, you know, really upset. And then she spun around, and she saw me standing there looking at her. And, of course, I was quite bewildered. And she run over, and she scooped me up in her arms, and she started hugging me and kissing me and making a big fuss over me. And I had no idea why, you know. I don't think I've ever had anybody that glad to see me alive since then. In fact, I've had a lot of people probably wish I wasn't alive, really. But, I mean, that's got to be the only time in my life that anybody was ever really, truly happy that I was alive. So maybe that's why I remember it. It was kind of a special moment. Anyway, yeah, she was pretty happy anyway that she hadn't killed me, and looking back on it, I guess it was a good thing, you know. Some may disagree, but people are entitled to their opinions, I guess. The bottom line is, though, yeah, it was quite a time. I remember it well, but she flattened my tricycle, flattened it right down like a suitcase. Didn't hurt the car a bit. You know, 58 Buick Roadmaster, eh? Didn't hurt the car a bit. Destroyed the tricycle, though. Just flattened it. And, yeah, I remember that anyway, and, yeah. So, had to get another tricycle. Luckily, I had an uncle, my dad's brother Bill, And Bill he had a side business at his house where he would rebuild bicycles and things like that. Now, my tricycle was way past rebuilding. It was just scrap metal. But my dad was able to get me another tricycle, and I think it was my Uncle Bill that supplied it, actually, from the ones that he had at home. So he had a little side business going doing that. So he worked at a place called Beach Industries, which made toolboxes and mailboxes and things. But he also had a little side hustle anyway, doing bicycle repair on the side, So anyway, I did get a new tricycle. I was without wheels for a few days, but I did get a new tricycle. And Mrs. Curran continued driving her '58 Buick and continued obsessing over her husband and what he was getting up to. And life went on. That's all. Life just went on as usual. But that's the story. I hope you enjoyed it. It's kind of comical. It's one of those deals that it really, when I think about the past, and the way the world was and everything, that's pretty much how the world was. Another funny thing about it is Charlie Anderson that owned the trailer park, he was kind of a heavy man. He used to smoke cigars and stuff, and he was very gruff. And he had a corner store, like a general store or a corner store or whatever, in a little building. Just when you drove into the trailer park there was a little grocery store there. That was Charlie Anderson's grocery store. And he didn't like us kids hanging around up near there. And so if we got too close to there, he'd open up the door and he'd just grunt at us. He'd go, "Here!" Just like that, and that was to tell us to get the heck away from there. And of course, we were kind of scared of him, because he was a man and he was gruff, and we were always a bit afraid of him anyway. He had a way about him that frightened us. There was an old wrecked a split-window Volkswagen Beetle parked behind the store, and sometimes we'd sneak up there and we'd play in that car. But of course, being kids, we'd get a little exuberant and we'd start laughing and yelling and stuff, and it wouldn't be long before he'd come around back and catch us, and he'd be, "Here now! You kids get away from there!" Like that, and he'd run us off anyway. But yeah, I remember that. It was a Volkswagen Beetle, and it had been in an accident. And it was parked behind the store there. And it was a split-window Beetle. It'd be worth a lot of money if it was around now. But at that time, it was junk, And I remember there was broken glass because some of the windows had shattered out of it. And you could see there was a big dent in it where it had hit something. And I don't know how the hell whoever was driving it at the time fared, but gotta figure they were injured at the very least. But anyway, I suppose he was concerned for our safety playing in that thing because of the broken glass and whatnot, And he didn't mean us any harm, I'm sure of that, but we were just frightened of him is all. We were just kids, and, kids were scared of grown-ups back then anyway, and especially a grown-up like that, because he had a way about him. He was a kind of an intimidating character. And I do remember one time I had a nickel, and I went into the store, and I bought a couple of lemon tarts, and they were wrapped in like a paper sleeve. And when you opened them up, there was a piece of cardboard, and the 2 lemon tarts were in heavy aluminum plates. They were actually they weren't even like aluminum foil. They were like a heavy aluminum plate that each tart was on. And I paid 5 cents for these 2 lemon tarts. And again, that was back in 1971, 1972 in there, Anyway, yeah, that's it. So I've told the story. I hope you enjoyed it. You can see Rocky's having a sleep. It's a little warmer in here than it was earlier. I don't see my breath anymore. So that's a good sign. The sun's come out. It's actually going to be a nice day, I think, once the cool burns off a bit. And I've got some work to do today, so that'll be good if it's nice. And Yeah. Anyway, I'll talk to you all later. I hope you all have a good day. Bye for now.